Nerd Sports Podcast, where we talk history of the game, numbers, and stats. And each week we highlight a charity that's doing good. If you haven't subscribed yet, then you should, because I'm this the real deal. And you know I gotta shout out the Buffalo Bills. Turn it up to the max, sit back and relax. This the Buffalo Nerd Sports Podcast. Let's go!
Hey, what is up, Bills Mafia? Welcome into this episode of the Buffalo Nerd, your home for Buffalo Bills football with a charity on top. Brought to you by SB Nation on the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network, and is being served up to you live by Picasso's Pizza on the Buffalo Rumblings vidcast network. Treat yourself to the most wonderful pizza on game day. Picasso's, we are Buffalo Pizza, shipping local and nationwide. Order online at picassospizza.net. I'm your host, Colt Schroeder. It's your first time catching the show. Thank you for being here. If you're already part of the Nerd Mafia, welcome home. As you can see this week, we are joined by Ryan Thomas of the Thomas Take Sports podcast. Ryan's a good friend of the show. He likes to come on and hang out, and I am not opposed to that. What is up, Scott Blakely? What's up with you, Ryan?
What's up, Colt? As always, it is a pleasure being on the Buffalo Nerd Sports podcast. Evening to all the Mafia members out there tuning in. I can't wait to get started with this awesome show.
I'm wanting Picasso's right now. Leave us in the house. That's what they're hoping you would say. All right. So what's up, everybody? Welcome in. Obviously, if you guys have been following, you know what we were going to talk about. Some of that's changed a little bit, obviously, in the past hour here. Before we came on, we got some disappointing news. But before we do dive into all that kind of stuff, I don't want to go straight into the negativity and, all that kind of stuff. I'd like to shout out, a very cool organization like we do every week on the show. We do highlight a charity. So let's go ahead and start out there. This week, we're gonna highlight the Jed Foundation. So the Jed Foundation, this is mental health awareness it's your wealth month, whatever, wellness month, right? So part of that is mental health awareness, right? And for me, the Jed Foundation, they work with teens in preventing suicide, right? They do a lot of activities just to present them with outlets and other ways that they can navigate through scenarios, without having to consider things like that. So obviously, I have a teenager. I think it's super important that mental health is at the forefront. And, there's organizations like the Jed Foundation that are doing that stuff for teens and helping them out. I think this is important now too. All the kids are getting ready to head back to school. School's a tough place. Right. So, it's a good organization to check out. They're doing a lot of cool stuff over there. So the Jed organization, you can find them at jedfoundation.org. Cool. So obviously the comments are flying in already. We might be in need of a punter. Where are you at, Ryan?
Man, Colt, before we hopped on the air here, briefly, before we hopped on the air for about 5 minutes leading up to it, we were talking about the situation now with Matt Araiza and the Buffalo Bills that has swept the NFL news headlines over the last, I'd say, half hour. And to have a show planned out of what we were going to talk about, and then a half hour before we're going on to have this news come out in regards to a situation when Matt Araiza was playing collegiate football at San Diego State. I am deeply disturbed by the reports. I am very frustrated, upset as a fan of the Buffalo Bills, not only as a fan of the Buffalo Bills, but as a fan of the Bills that was rooting for Matt Araiza to make this 53-man roster. He makes the 53-man roster, and then this story comes out. And as I mentioned to you, Colt, to hear this news, the first thing that I thought of is obviously what are the Buffalo Bills going to do from here? But the Buffalo Bills are owned by a very powerful female by the name of Kim Pegula. How will she react to this news? And I think how she reacts to this news will tell the tale of what the Bills will do in response to this news. Whether Matt Araiza is an NFL punter or not in the next 24 hours will be something to see.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think the folks in the comments are kind of in agreement. This is for me, like what we talk about Deshaun Watson each week and what he did, and this is getting too much. It's too much. I'm sick of seeing this in the NFL. I don't care if it's accusations, if it's not, whatever. Like these guys' names just shouldn't be involved in this stuff. Right? Like there's so many of these guys that have gone through the NFL that you've never heard crap about it. right? Never a word about it, right? There's ways to go about doing this, without this. So I was going to have a good conversation about him and this, that, and the other, and what he had done and making it here. And now it's just kind of like, yeah, dude, I don't really care about you anymore. I kind of hope that we just like move on and we go from there. But if that does happen, then we were just talking about it before. Who punts for this football team? We just, and Coach McDermott was like, we want to give Hack a chance to get on to another team. Well, he did. And now what?
Now what is the question? I mean, I went on a few websites just to see who are some of the free agent punters out there, and 40-year-old Dustin Colquitt, Michael Pilardi, who was the punter for the Miami Dolphins for a few years, Hunter Niswander of the Dallas Cowboys, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys. Those are names that you would not necessarily know of.
I would rather go this route, right?
AK Cash might have a point with Pat McAfee, but I think his punting days, I should say, are over. But man, this is just such a devastating story to the Bills and to the Bills organization, because truly, I don't want to hear any stories like this, much like you, Colt. And to me, this is a moment where the line in the sand needs to be drawn in terms of football and obviously human decency, moral, human decency. The reports go far beyond just a disturbing allegation. This is very detailed, far too detailed for anyone to read that and to come away with, oh well, let's investigate this. No, let's cut them. Cut ties, cut them loose, and just move on. That's what professional organizations do. They put the football aside, and unfortunately, it's going to hurt the Bills because of the situation being that it's August 25th. We're heading into the third week of the preseason, and there's slim pickings out there in terms of the position. But at this point, you do have one of the best offenses in the NFL, so you shouldn't have to punt as much as some of the other ones.
Right.
But obviously, they need a punter that is capable.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, and Scott Blakely, I think you got Richard Rush hit you up there in the chat. Yeah, so he signed with Indy, like it was like a day later, he was already scooped up by Indy, and obviously Indy's not going to be like handing him back out, right, like immediately, right? So this could be an interesting situation. But there is one thing that is kind of a positive that happened today too, right, is that we reworked the Dawkins deal, right? So we've right now per Sport Track, we're around $10 million. Right. So at least we do have some funds available to us as a team now. I think that personally, this money should be assigned to the potential of keeping Poyer around. A lot of the Bills Mafia I see is all about the OBJ thing. I'm just not buying into that. If you believe in Gabe Davis and Isaiah McKenzie, why do we need OBJ is kind of my stance. But I would much rather pay Poyer. But what do you think we do with some of this money?
I like your theory as far as where you're headed on the Poyer thought of maybe they put some of that money into extending Poyer. But I also, my first thought actually when I had heard that they moved some money around to create cap space with Dawkins is the simple fact that maybe Trey White isn't as further along as they were hoping that he would be. And maybe, just maybe, they put some money into a free agent corner like a Joe Hayden, or maybe a Richard Sherman, a veteran type player that still has a little bit of tread left on the tires that wants to be a part of a contender, and somebody that, Von Miller's lobbied for Joe Hayden, as well as OBJ. As far as the OBJ situation, I feel like it would stunt the development of Khalil Shakir if OBJ was in the fold. Not that I'm opposed to the move, but I don't really feel it's a necessary need when the deepest position, in my opinion, on the entire roster is the wide receiver unit, even over the defensive line. And I think this preseason has shown that thus far. But to me, that money movement, the maneuvering of the salary cap that Brandon Beane is so good at, he's proven that each and every season. I think it should go to a corner. I think it could potentially go to a corner in the event that Trey White is just not ready for week 1, week 2, week 3 in that range.
Yeah, we're going to dive into the cornerbacks a little bit here as we've been kind of hitting the roster throughout the month here and going through each thing. So we'll dive into that. I'm also a little curious to see if this money might potentially be for like a Dawson Knox or somebody like that to try to get Knox or Edmonds done in season and then worry about the other one off season. Or maybe you're looking at potentially tagging Edmonds this off season. So you're going to pay Knox in season if you've got some extra funds. So I think there's going to be an interesting thing to see that happens here. But obviously, I think it all kind of almost has to wait now because you might be looking for a brand new punter, and that's a big problem. I mean, that was a phase of the game that I think a lot of people thought for the next 10 years we were done. Minus having to replace Reed Ferguson at some point potentially, right? He's been around for a while. In 10 years, he might not be still wanting to play the game or whatever. But besides that, it's going to be interesting. He already had a tough next couple weeks ahead of him, I thought, with nipping this roster down. And now stuff like this just ain't making it any easier.
Right, we thought we'd have Bass and Ariza for the next 10 years, and we know we're going to have Bass for the next 10 years. I'm pretty safe, in feeling that way. God willing.
Right. So I do want to hit on, too, because after the first preseason game, I was happy with the way, because this is 10 in a row, right? Like, so we magically win in the preseason all the time now. That's how good this team is, that we just start winning in the preseason all the time, too. But so that's 10 in a row. But after week 1, I was kind of like, this didn't look good. I was glad to see the team had heart and depth enough to stay with it all the way till the end. This last week, it was like, yeah, can we just start now? Let's just start the season, right? Like, let's just go. These guys are like 100% ready, So where were you after the Denver game?
The Denver game, I truthfully thought that, top to bottom, it just showed the depth that they have accumulated over the course of the last, off season or two, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I alluded to it with how this last game showed how deep their wide receiver position is. I think Khalil Shakir could be one of the steal picks of this year's draft. I also am blown away by Blackshear, the running back, who has really had himself a great preseason. And to me, James Cook, Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, in the action that we've seen, all three of them were very, very potent, and that's something that the Buffalo Bills have not had in quite some time, to have not one running back, but 2 running backs, 3 running backs. I mean, they are loaded. Case Keenum is locked in as the QB2. I think a lot of people were a little bit too hard on Case Keenum post week 1 of the preseason.
He played well last week.
He played very, very well, and Isaiah Hodgins, was another receiver that I really liked, from last week. So just shows the depth that they have. Kair Elam, he showed some very promising things in terms of man coverage. Showed some things in terms of penalties that I didn't quite like.
Yeah.
But all in all, just top to bottom, this team is as deep as it gets. And one of the comments there that said that the depth could beat some other NFL teams, I would agree with that. They are so deep that they are in a rare, weird circumstance where when you're trimming the roster down, most of these guys that they're cutting will go to other teams. There's no question about that. So Brandon Beane has a tough task ahead of him. I love what Balin Spector has done as well at linebacker. Bernard, the third-round rookie linebacker, he's been fantastic as well.
Yeah.
So really, all good things to say in terms of the performance this preseason thus far.
Yeah, I mean, it's been nice to see. I mean, and obviously with Trey not back yet, we're going to really dive into those cornerbacks. But there's some interesting things. And actually, I'm glad that this just got brought up, because I totally wanted to talk about this before everything happened. And before we go any further, I want to talk about this, because when I saw that video, that was the first thing I thought is like, this dude's suspended, right? Like, he's straight swinging helmets around. But I saw after that I think it was Tom Placerero. I'm not sure how he says his last name. I probably just butchered it. But he'd come out and said that basically because it's a practice, the NFL doesn't actually monitor like what takes place at the practice. So it would be up to the teams to enforce some kind of punishment if they wanted to. I'm like, that seems like such bull crap, right?
That's
like
stupid.
I mean, they can drug test you while you're getting ready to go into practice, right? But they're not going to make you follow the same rules of not trying to assault the other players on the field, right? Like, that doesn't seem right. But yeah, I mean, to me, I was like, man, he's got to hit something, right? Like, they got to hit him. This dude does this a lot. He's great, but he does this a lot.
He does, and you know the Rams have obviously they're a high profile team. They won the Super Bowl. Not only that, but they're the L.A. Rams, and
Right.
they've had multiple seasons on HBO Hard Knocks. And Aaron Donald is one of those guys that I feel like he needs to get super super angry in order for himself to play well shortly thereafter. It's almost like he gets super super angry, and then the come down allows him to play good football or even in a practice. And it's crazy because I was watching, both social medias of the teams. I follow all the teams on social media, as you do, I'm sure of it. And Joey B and Matt Stafford are on the sideline when this is going down, and they're laughing. They didn't expect this. Like, they didn't know if it was legitimate or if it was a work in terms of pro wrestling terms. They didn't understand what was going on, and then they realized, oh, wow, he's actually swinging his helmet around.
Yeah. The other team's helmet.
Yeah, Aaron Donald is long overdue for a suspension. I think he's knocked on that door a lot.
Sue? They used to hit Sue all the time. Sue would get hit every year for the crap he would try to pull. There's like, after this video, all these other things start coming out, right, of all the stuff that he's done. And there's multiple times where he's like choking like he's literally like choking people, right? Like,
right. Didn't Sue step on Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, he like straight stomped on him.
Yeah,
he like straight stomped on him. Yeah, like, so I mean, there's no room for that stuff, right? But at least he was hit. He was suspended. They fine him. They do all those things. At least they check him, right? This guy, they're just like, yeah, whatever, man. Let him kill somebody else. He was swinging around 2 Cincinnati helmets at one point, which means there's 2 players not wearing helmets, and he's swinging them around.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah,
so like
that's awful.
That's dangerous.
Yeah, it's bad for the game, and it's bad for the fact that he is looked at as one of those, superstar type players on the defensive side of the ball, maybe the best defensive player in the game. And if you're not punishing one player in the same way that you punished another, you're just playing favorites at this point.
That's what it looks like, right?
It's clearly obvious that the NFL views Aaron Donald as one of their favorites, whereas Ndamukong Suh was not, or Myles Garrett for that matter. Myles Garrett,
same boat, yeah.
With Mason Rudolph, I should say, with the helmet swing and all that on Monday Night Football. What's the difference to me? It's the action's the same. It's just the setting is different, and that's just stupid.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the way it's supposed to function, right? I think that's obviously the way that it is, right? But yeah. So thanks for bringing that up, circling back, because I did want to hit on that, and then all this other stuff just started stirring up right before we got on here, right? So it was craziness. But so we got one more preseason game left: Panthers, Bills. It's going to be like hugging. We're just checking to see if there's any guys we want from their team, probably, just to one last look at Carolina, before it's all said and done, like we like to do or whatever. But we're not going to play starters, so. What are you kind of looking for here? I mean, you brought up Blackshear a little bit earlier. I hope he has a terrible game, because I don't want him to go anywhere else. I'd rather just stash him on our practice squad right now. So I hope he just kind of has a terrible game, and everybody thinks it was just luck the first couple games, and we get to keep him around. But so yeah, where are you at? What are you looking for from this last game?
With the way Blackshear's been running, I doubt he's capable of a bad game.
He's looked good.
This guy has looked really good. What I'm looking for, though, is actually just a high snap count, I should say, for some of the younger players that they have drafted and accumulated, whether they're UDFAs or just late round draft choices. Obviously, Christian Benford has been a name that's been talked about all preseason long, training camp long. I'm looking to see him take a final next step, en route to making the team. I got my eyes on him, and honestly, I got my eyes on James Cook. I've had my eyes on James Cook this whole preseason, and maybe the Bills won't play him as they do deem him one of their quote-unquote starters, but if he is out there, I just feel like he brings such an exciting element to this offense that we haven't seen in quite some time, and a name that if you go back and circle back and watch the tape from last week's preseason game, it's going to be very tough to cut a player by the name of Quentin Morris. Mm-hmm. This guy was smashing people
2 weeks in a row.
The run, 2 weeks in a row. In terms of the run blocking, he's such an aware player. And
he's playing that Gilliam role too, right? He's got that fullback essentially locked in as number 2 fullback partially too. OJ Howard might be in trouble.
That's what I'm thinking, and I never thought I'd say that for a guy by the name of Quentin Morris that I didn't even know who he was. prior to this preseason. But
Right.
hey, that's what this is about. It's about trimming it down to 53, and the best players from July to late August are the teams that make it. And the guys that are on the outside looking in, like O.J. Howard, that at one point Jamison Crowder seemed like he was in that position until he got healthy. So
yeah, he'll stick, but
yeah, it's a very interesting time, in terms of being a Bills fan, not only with the expectations, but in terms of, I can't remember a team in Buffalo Bills history in my fanhood, and I'm 30, so I don't really quite remember the Bills Super Bowl years as well as I'd like to. But this team is so deep. This team is top to bottom. The moves that Brandon Beane made to put the roster to 90 players, you could put some of those guys on some of these really bottom level bad teams like the Lions and the Jaguars. And these guys would be starters. So it's been very fun, and I'm looking at what guys can really stand out and make the roster.
Yeah. A couple things I saw in the chat here that I'm big fans of. So good question so who punts tomorrow night, right? Because if they just say, hey, you're out, bro, like who's going to punt? Do we just go for it on fourth down? Because I think you'd have to sign a free agent, right? It can't be somebody that's sitting on waivers or anything, right? Because they'd have to clear, and then you have to have like a day. So do we just have somebody go out there and drop kick punts? Secondly, a good point that was brought up is Brandon Beane's going to have a tough time this year because of this right here. Anybody that he lets go is going to be a New York Giant.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like that's 100% going to be it, right? Like, they're trying to build exactly what we're doing, right? And this was all followed up, which I love this. Giants need a team. We're not going to dispute that. But anywho, let's talk about some cornerbacks and stuff. Actually, real quick, last week I shouted out that we were doing the pick'em contest for the Buffalo Nerd. You guys go in there. The link's down below in the description down below. It's free to play. You guys can see if you can beat me. There's a little Isaiah McKenzie autograph picture at the end of it for you if you're the winner. So go ahead and click below and enter that contest and see if you guys can take me down this offseason. Levi is in the house. He won last year, so you guys can also challenge Levi and see if you can beat him. But let's talk about the cornerbacks, because Tre'Davious White, we still don't know, right? If you go and look at the official depth chart that's sitting on the Bills, the Bills website, and if you listen to the show, you know how we feel about the depth chart and stuff. It's a work in progress to try to progress players, let people know, there's a lot being played. But if you look at it, it's listed as White is still listed as a number 1 on the depth chart, right? And then he's got Benford behind him, and Dane Jackson is listed above Elam in the other spot. So if you're reading that and Tre'Davious isn't right, are you looking at that as Dane Jackson is once himself this starting position, minus what happens maybe in this last game here as the number 1 cornerback? Or is this just still motivation for Elam when it comes down to it? They're going to put him over on the 1.
Oh, man, that's a tough question. I think with something like this at this time of the year, heading into the season, it comes down to who they feel is most comfortable within the defense. So obviously Trey White is number 1, and when he's healthy, he's one of the best in the game. Dane Jackson did some really nice things last year, and I think that those nice things, you go back and if you got some of those games on your DVR, you blink, you might miss it because he's not being targeted to where you wouldn't see the play develop, where Dane Jackson gets in front of a receiver to step in front of a pass, bat it down, or intercept a football, or just his tackling ability that I think is extremely underrated, and it might be his best attribute in his skill set. But I honestly feel man-to-man is where this league has trended in terms of man coverage. Trey White is one of those guys, obviously, that I mentioned, but Kaiir Elam was drafted to be a man-to-man corner, and his skills man-to-man, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing the physicality. I'm seeing the awareness in terms of jumping the route. I'm seeing his eyes in the back of his head tracking the football. I think it's Kaiir Elam's CB2 job to lose, and that's not necessarily a slight on Dane Jackson. I feel like it breaks down as Elam as the CB2, Dane Jackson as the CB2B, and then you have to acknowledge the greatness of Teron Johnson and the fact that when Steve Tasker and these commentators go through the depth chart of the Bills on that bottom part of your screen and you see the pictures and the cool graphics that they have, you see 2 linebackers. You don't see 3. And the third one, essentially, is Teron Johnson. So the fact that he's able to play at that high of a level consistently as he has these last couple seasons, he has to be the CB3. He's one of the best nickel corners in the NFL, maybe the best nickel corner in the NFL. But in terms of names that I'm looking at that I think could potentially show up and show out, especially in this preseason game in terms of trying to make the roster, obviously Christian Benford has had a great camp. Cam Lewis is on the outside looking in. He's somebody that really needs to step up and show that he's worthy of a roster spot on this team. As well, you have some tweener guys that maybe Benford is one of them that could also play safety, but like Jamarcus Ingram, Jaquan Johnson, those are guys that have listed at safety. But they really have a solid foundation that they have groomed these players in the secondary in particular to eventually take on bigger roles once players go down, God forbid, or once players leave the team in the future, whether it's Poyer in the next few years or Hyde in the next few years. And that's something that I think needs to be acknowledged. They've actually groomed this secondary ahead of time for the future and for the present.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because that was, for me, as I looked at the depth chart and I was thinking about it to myself, and you brought up Benford and those guys, and I'm like, if these guys work, we have a very, very young core of good cornerbacks, right? And you mentioned Johnson, and then sitting behind Johnson, they actually have Cam Lewis listed as a nickel right now. So that means he's got to be out Teron Johnson and Saran Neal.
Yeah.
And I think Saran Neal is going to have himself a nice season this year, and he's probably going to be on the defense a little more than we've seen him in the past, potentially. It just depends on what happens with White, and, who knows? They might just put him out at cornerback at some point in time because they trust him, right? They just trust that he knows what to do, right? And they go from there. So that crew, though, I mean, that's awesome. If you somehow have Dane Jackson, who's panning out, then you hit on Benford, plus you hit on, that's a nice stable, and they all get to work with White for the next 5 years or so. Like, that's beautiful in my opinion. So you hit on the safeties a little bit. The Poyer Hyde situation, they're both kind of nicked up already. I think everybody and their brother thinks they're the best safety duo in the league, except for everybody outside of the Bills Mafia for some reason. But the depth behind them is somewhat questionable too at times. So this back end's very interesting. So I touched on it last week that the importance of the defensive line this year and being disruptive within seconds is going to be very, very needed, compared to in the past. You could let these guys hold on for 3, 4, 5 seconds back there. I don't think we can do that this year.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought that up, because looking at this team and looking at what they've done these last few seasons to make their team where it is, or what it is today, I should say, they have invested heavily in defensive linemen. They have invested first-round draft picks, second-round draft picks, Von Miller's contract.
Monies,
they have monies. They have invested a lot, and that has to pay dividends at some point for you. And if it does, then this secondary mostly will benefit from it, as well as Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, who I think both of those guys have shouldered a really heavy workload these last 2 years, that if this defensive line could be a little bit better, takes a little bit of pressure off of Tremaine from man in the middle, takes a little bit of pressure off Matt Milano from being in coverage as much, when the defensive line, the defensive front can actually get to the quarterback. That's the goal. So I'm right there with you. This is a young group as far as their secondary goes outside of Trey White, and they're going to get, I think, a good amount of playing time. I don't feel like Trey White is as ready as they hoped he would be by now. And I'm not saying, the sky is falling or anything like that. Trey White had a very tough injury, and they want him to be right where he was before the injury when he comes back. So why rush it? Why rush it? Why put him out there to feel like he's less than himself? Put him out there when he's ready, whether it's week 2, week 3, week 4. And it'll actually help these guys get the playing time that they deserve and that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's 100% accurate. I agree with that all across the board. It's just super important for this. And if you think about it, right, we went without him last year. So this defense is capable of doing it already. Now you have to look at it and say, okay, you lost one of those pieces, but from what we've brought in, I feel like they're pretty comparable to Levi Wallace. If you're just asking them to do the same things as you asked Levi to do, then it should work, right? You've improved the defensive line, in my opinion. Your linebackers should do better, as you just mentioned, and your safeties are still there, right? So I think it still works, right? Like, that's why I'm not like super worried. Like, if he's not ready, right? Like, if he's not ready, that's fine. Like, cool. Like, let him get lean and mean and let these guys work, because I'm not going to be disappointed if they get an experience to start the season against the defending world champions. I'm not going to be disappointed if Dane Jackson and Elam have to line up against from Kupp and Allen Robinson and learn about what the NFL is all about, right? Like, yeah. I'm not opposed to that at all, even if it results in a loss. That's important for those guys, right? And that's two of the best wide receivers in the league, in my opinion. So, I agree with you. And it goes back to, what happened with Trey White when he was first drafted here to replace Stephon Gilmore.
Stephon Gilmore goes out, Trey White goes in, and Trey White lined up, if my memory serves me right, 3 straight weeks. Julio Jones, AJ Green, and there was another one that I'm forgetting. I can't remember the third one, but Julio Jones and AJ Green, I know were two of the first wide receivers that he lined up against. That was a lot to ask of a rookie corner to go up against arguably the 2 best deep threats in the NFL at that time, back to back.
On bad teams.
And on bad teams, yes.
Yeah, he was out there all the time.
Right, with barely a depth piece behind him, to say the least. So I just feel like this is not the sky is falling. If they did move some money around to create space for a Joe Hayden or, a veteran body somewhere along the roster, I'm not against it. And maybe they decide to add more depth to the offensive line. They traded away Cody Ford for a 5th-round draft choice. Maybe they decide to sign a veteran guard that has played on, some really good teams these last few years or whatnot. So there's still some names out there. There's still names out there that could contribute. Unfortunately, they're not punters.
That's right.
So,
yeah. I mean, I think we're in a good spot when you have an offense like we do. Your defense doesn't necessarily have to be. As long as we're around that top 10, this offense should be able to carry a lot of what a top 10 defense can handle, in my opinion. So I think we're going to be all right either way. But good discussion, Ryan. Always appreciate you coming on, man. That's going to do it for this week, guys. I appreciate everybody hanging out. And I actually, if Daniel is still in here, I noticed that he dropped this in the chat at the very beginning, because I've been going with the Nerd Mafia, and I've now had a couple people tell me that we should be calling it the Nerd Herd. And Daniel just dropped that in there again now. So starting next week, we might have to swap this over to the Nerd Herd.
Dude, I'd buy one of those t-shirts for sure.
So I might start spitting that next week. So thanks, Daniel, for throwing that in there. For you guys that didn't catch the show early on this week, we highlighted the Jed Foundation. So you can head over there and check out jedfoundation.org. Very cool organization, helping teens against, suicide and just things to do with their mental health and all that kind of stuff. Been around for a long time. And, I think it's just going to be very fun to see how this all plays out. I hope our organization does what I think they're going to do, and make sure that we are, when we go to the Super Bowl this season and we win a title, we do it as a high quality franchise that's making the right moves, doing the right things. That's what I want to be. Right. So Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks again, Ryan, for joining. And of course, go Bills.
Make sure you leave a review and subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll see you next time. Leg out!